Welcome to Filmwax Radio, Mary Engel.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is a really unique type of thing for me because I've spent so much time talking to filmmakers and people associated with films that are new, but they're independent. So there's a through line to your dad's film here. Some cite Little Fugitive as the first American independent film.
That's possibly a really nice title that you've given it. We'll keep it. It was certainly an early independent film. There were a couple people before him, but certainly he gets a lot of credit, and my mother as well, Ruth Orkin, and my father's Morris Engel. It was certainly very early, yes. And he was not a Hollywood person. He was only a New York person, actually never went to California, and it all really just happened, and it became a whole little industry in itself. The film has just lived on and on and on since 53, 60 years ago.
That's remarkable, and we'll talk about why that might be in a moment. But let's go back. I apologize for leaving your mom's name off this. It is technically and officially directed by Ray Ashley, Morris Engel, and Ruth Orkin, correct? And just tell me, your parents, they were married at the time?
They got married after the film was made.
Success of Little Fugitive.
They got married in November 10th of 52.
It would be a nice story if they met cute and they fell in love over the course of the film, but
they knew each other beforehand.
Okay.
They met as magazine photographers in the 40s.
Thank you. And who was Ray Ashley?
Ray Ashley was a writer that my father worked on PM, a magazine with earlier, and he asked different people to work on the movie with him, and he said a lot of people turned him down, but he said to Ray, let's make a movie, and let's make a movie about two kids. Ray said, okay. And I think there was a lot of back and forth for over a year. And the script evolved, the story evolved, and it all happened on Coney.
Yeah. I think the reason why people do refer to it, and I've heard it referred to it as the first independent film, more in terms of, as you mentioned, it was made in New York. I think the spirit of it.
Yeah, well, how it was made was pretty damn independent, if you can say that. It was really the three of them who started it, and really the making of it was, I think, fair to say, primarily my father. There was one assistant on the set. I think the camera was incredibly innovative at the time. It was a handheld, handmade 35 millimeter camera that he made with a man named Charles Woodruff, and a lot of the people, his old pals from the time, were primarily documentary filmmakers like Penny Baker and Maisels and Lionel Rogeson and Leacock. And Penny specifically has talked about, Penny Baker has talked about, and Maisels being influenced by my father's camera and making their own cameras at the time. So I think, and the cost, I mean, my father never used to give out what it cost, but it cost only $35,000 to make it. There's no outtakes because there was no extra money for film, and there's just a lot about it that was incredibly independent, so to speak.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know that, at least I know Pennebaker would invent equipment, that he invented cameras and built them. Yeah, well, now, of course, he's a venerable, but he was at the time known in the last generation or two, have made all these seminal documentaries.
Yeah, sure.
But he was also an innovator.
Yeah, I mean, when I interviewed him and Maisels, I made a short film about my dad called Morris Engel, the Independent, because when we released the box set, I had, I'll backtrack for a second, I had made a film on my mom called Ruth Orkin, Frames of Life. It was the first film I ever made. We had a big retrospective at ICP in 1995, and somehow somebody had gotten us an edit room for free. So I started making this film, and long story short, I ended up doing it on my own. I was doing it with some other people. It didn't work out. I ended up doing it on my own. Finished it the day before the opening of the film. The curator was a little concerned, but it ended up getting into Sundance and about 20 other festivals. The Academy actually had said it was a top 10 short doc nominee for that year, and they called it one of the outstanding documentaries of that year. So that was incredible. I had done this film on my mom. There was nothing for the box set on my father, so I made the films of Morris Engel, the Independent. But back to why I mentioned that is because Penny Baker talked somewhat extensively about just how influenced he had been, and now what you're saying makes a lot of sense as to why he was.
Right. Yeah.
In terms of the camera.
I appreciate the context. It's true. And there's the connection also that it's no surprise that he came up with those guys, the Maisels and the Penny Bakers, the Leacock, because his style was certainly documentary like, and I'm sure people at the time thought it was a documentary.
Yeah, people did, and he didn't like that. I mean,
sure
that was because for him it was not a documentary, and he had done a couple little shorts beforehand that were, but this was totally a feature, total fiction, and obviously there's always connections with somebody's life. You do what you shoot, and you do what you know. I mean, he shot in Coney Island because he grew up in Coney Island and Williamsburg, but went to Abraham Lincoln High School. He didn't have a father, so there's no father in the film. He was brought up by his mother and 3 older sisters. But it had a lot of impact for him, but it was fiction, so...
But I think that's yet another element of why they talk about it as an independent, because there is such a familiarity to now, because now you must know, because occasionally I'm sure you see some young filmmakers' new work and how much it looks like what your dad was doing 60 years ago.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it as we speak, but it holds up so well, the film. And I mean, we had incredible run this year at the Film Forum, and it's been showing all over the country, and it's going to be shown at Venice, in a couple weeks.
I understand Rooftop Films.
Oh, of course. Rooftop Films is tomorrow, which is incredible. We've been waiting for that for a long time. We tried to do it in July, but what's incredible, what I'm trying to say is that people's memories of it are they're just so amazed, and it means so much. And I think I was writing about it too for Venice. One of the things is that it's almost like a documentary for them, because it's so historical, in terms of Coney Island and in terms of Brooklyn, in terms of summer. And in terms of just the basic story of a child wanting to explore and be on his own. So even though it is fiction, it almost does hold up like a documentary in some ways, if that makes any sense.
It makes complete sense. What's interesting to me, too, and why I'm glad we're doing this together, is because I think it's also very, very unique that you have taken on the mantle. Is that the right expression? That you've sort of been handed the gauntlet to
this film. Those are words, yeah, that's been said before.
Well, yeah, it's not certainly the only case of this, but it is still, of course, very unique. We know that you have your own career with your own work. You've brought up a couple of examples, but obviously a particular interest in your own backstory, because both of your parents documented their lives, right? And so it's there, so it makes sense you would do that.
Yeah.
I want to know more, like, when was the first time you remember seeing Little Fugitive? When did it, for you, crystallize that you wanted to do something with it?
You touched on a couple things. The first one is basically, I've basically made my parents' work my life's work. I worked at other companies, and my last job before I stopped working for anybody else was at William Morris, because I wanted to be an agent, and I've been in the business since I was a kid, and I'm still in the acting union. And representing actors is sort of what I'm doing now, is representing their work in a sense, because you learn a tremendous amount about selling and promoting. And so I decided I could just handle my own parents' work instead of handling all these crazy, actors, writers, you have it. And it gave me a way to be independent, and then also have a child and have the freedom to, be there for him when I wanted to be there. And I have made it my life's work in an even bigger way, because I started a group of people who handle photographic art, primarily photographic archives. And we started with 5 people about 10 years ago. Now I have over 130 people. That's become a whole nother job in itself. So that's the answer to that question. And it's an interesting one, handling, your parents' work, because it keeps you very close to them. In good ways and bad ways. It's hard sometimes, but it's a wonderful, I always say it's a huge responsibility, but a wonderful legacy to represent. And then your other question you touched on, when you start talking about film in my family and Little Fugitive, it's a big question, because, and it's a very important one, because I always say in my family, film was like our religion. We were Jewish, but, synagogues, that had little meaning for my father.
Didn't hold a candle over to the cinema?
I hate to tell you. The Academy Awards was our big night of the year. Seriously.
That was the HHD?
It was the most important thing. And, we started showing Little Fugitive at birthday parties. I think when I was younger, it was just always there. It wasn't until I probably did start handling it, really, that it became much more important in terms of how I understood it and how, I viewed my parents' work. After my mother passed away, which is almost 30 years ago, I was handling her work. So I was involved in the film somewhat. But my father only passed away 8 years ago, and I started handling the film with him at least 5 or 10 years before he died. And it's just been, it's a whole, it's like a whole thing in itself. I mean, I don't know what to say. He always said, you know, people asked him how he was doing, and he was in his 80s, and he, you know, even if at the end when he was sick, he'd say, I'm great, because he was so ecstatic with the incredible reception that Little Fugitive had gotten, you know.
And not only gotten, but gotten and gotten again.
Well, I mean, keeping track of the press for Little Fugitive is a lot of work. Just keeping track of Little Fugitive, the fans, the scholars. Right. I have my Little Fugitive team, I call it, of people who are like my close group. The Museum of Modern Art has been incredible, especially the curator Ann Mora. Peter Williamson has helped, along with the Film Foundation, because they restored it. I mean, it's incredible, you know, to have somebody on your side like that, and that's what you need. And
when was that?
They did in the late 90s at some point. They also, Anne was able to get funding from the Film Foundation to secure the restoration of also the second and third film. There are 2 other films, but Little Fugitive gets all the credit. There's Lovers and Lollipops in 1955 and Weddings and Babies in 1958. And then there's a 4th film nobody's ever seen that's sort of like my dad's hippie film from 68 called I Need a Ride to California, but it was shot in color, also 35, and it's turned magenta. So we're going to try to figure out how to fix that.
I have Martin Scorsese's number. We'll get him on the phone, too.
Well, he's the chair of the Film Foundation,
right.
So...
so maybe you have a... Are you saying you have a better insight?
I don't know. I don't know. I know I've never met him, but I'm very, very pleased that he was involved.
We'll get it color restored. Don't worry. Well, you know, now this is a nice transition. Then we can also make a call.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. We have a really special connection, and this happens with a lot of my parents' work, other films, and a lot of their photographs, but who's now Rich Andrusco, the little boy who's now, not 7 years old, because it's 60 years later, so he's in his late 60s. But we had an amazing time because he came east from the West Coast for the Film Forum opening that we had earlier this year, and I've stayed very close with him these last number of years, and we are going to call him and talk to him for a minute about the film, I think, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Hello?
Hey, Rich?
Yep.
Can you hear me? It's Mary with Adam. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Hi, Rich.
This is Adam.
Hi, Adam.
Let's just jump right in. Let me first ask you, can you describe the experience of being associated with a movie for 60 years? Like it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Well, first of all, I've been able to keep associated with the film because of Mary ever since Morris passed away. And we've been in constant contact. And pretty much most of the past few years, there's been very little activity with the film from my perspective, from my side, until the past couple of years. Well, actually, about 5 years ago, we got together to visit New York with my son, and we had a dinner party and met a few people at Mary's house. And then all of a sudden this past year, we've had a lot of activity, personal appearances.
What was that like, just all of a sudden at this point in your life?
Oh, it's unbelievable. I mean, it was just great. We went to New York, and it was something that I can't remember ever experiencing. It was exciting and wonderful to meet all the people that were thrilled to see the movie. I was somewhat surprised how many people were really interested in seeing the movie at the Film Forum. And it was fun meeting the fans and talking to them and signing autographs and all the pictures taken.
That must have been. Wow. So let me ask you, you made this film 60 years ago. You were 7 years old. Do you have a lot of memories of shooting that? And or are they fuzzy? What's your experience in terms of your memory?
Well, to be honest with you, it was real fuzzy until I actually... I don't even know if I told Mary this, but we had a showing of the movie here in Portland, Oregon, at the Art Museum. And when we did, it was the first time I actually sat down and watched the movie on a big screen movie theater since the movie was made.
Wow.
Which was astonishing to myself. And I told this to the people in the audience as well. And it really, really brought back a lot of memories of the filming that went on. Prior to that, it was just little bits and pieces and very, fuzzy.
Sure, I'm sure it was. Any of the memories include what it was like working with Morris? And do you have any memories of Morris that you can share?
Definitely working with Morris it didn't seem that we had too much interaction with Morris because it seemed that making the film went so fast. But the little times that I do remember, they were fun. I mean, he always made me feel comfortable, and he always absolutely no pressure. He would just tell me to just go do this and go do that. And it was a very enjoyable experience. And then after that, after making the film, to be honest with you, Morris was not in my life. I did a whole bunch of running around of publicity and interviews and everything. I'm assuming that most of that activity was put together by, I guess, William Morris Agency, which was what the agency I had signed up with. At least that's what I've been told. And then I didn't stay in contact with Morris for quite a few years. I thought my parents did, and then I found out later on that they didn't. And then as I got older, I decided to establish contact with Morris, and from that day on, we stayed in contact. And the time that we went back there for the dinner, we met Morris, I think it was the same time, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the same time we met Morris at Coney Island.
That was a little earlier, Rich. I think that was like late 90s. You came back another time, and what we did, this was my father's idea, believe it or not, and Rich agreed to it. We met at Coney Island after they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and my dad had Rich recreate a lot of the scenes from the movie, and I videotaped it, and that's partly in my documentary. Does that sound right?
That was special.
Yeah, that was all the meetings with Rich and my dad in these later years were really, really moving because the connection, I think, even though it sounds like it was very brief, was just so strong. Is that fair to say, Rich? There was something about... I'm sorry?
Definitely. Morris was almost like an uncle to me, like a family member to me.
And you were probably like a kid to him before he didn't have kids till about 10 years later. So there's something about everything to do with the movie. Even there was a lot of rejection in the beginning, and there was a lot of trouble with raising money, and there were all different issues, but somehow it just persevered, and it just has created this incredible, monumental masterpiece, if I can say that.
You mean objectively?
Objectively, yeah. I don't usually do that, but it just has had such a life of its own.
Well, it's funny, Mary, because when you talk about it, I feel like you were there. Yet, of course, you weren't alive at that time. Your parents were just starting to see each other, so
I think, of
course, that doesn't necessarily in of itself mean you weren't alive.
I was 10 years later. Yeah. I was about 10 years later. I think when you see a film hundreds of times, when you see a film hundreds of times, and when you talk about it so much, and it was so important for my dad, and because and my mother, but I certainly spent a lot more time as an adult listening to my father. It has just become, as I said, it's part of the family, and Rich, as I said earlier, it's sort of the religion in our family. Film certainly was the religion for Morris and for me and the rest of the family.
And like I said, I really didn't get a full appreciation for the film until I actually sat down at the Portland showing and saw it on the big screen. I mean, what a difference from watching it on TV. I mean, it's just suddenly I really felt part of it and in it.
Well, one of the things that was really important, which is why I wanted to bring you out here, which is what we did, is because I knew you had to appreciated as an adult, because he really hadn't. At least also people's reactions to it, and we did about 10 Q&As together, and he became a pro, I'll tell you, answering all the questions people had for him. But just to see the appreciative audiences, I think, was hopefully an incredible experience as well.
Oh, it was definitely. It's one of the highlights of my life, especially that I could share it with my wife and my daughter and my granddaughter.
What do your children make of your fledgling acting career?
You know, I guess because of them seeing the photos all over the place, CDs, and us talking about it all the time, I don't see a whole bunch of excitement or anything like that. It's just commonplace to them. But my daughter was really astonished the way people were reacting in New York at the film forum, and it was great. My son, you know, he said, "Oh, okay." You know, it's like, it doesn't click with him, I don't think. That's how important it is. He was somewhat excited about when we went back to New York and had that dinner party, and plus at the same time I was given the Brooklyn Day was given to me by the president of the Brooklyn borough.
Yeah, Marty Markowitz gave him a proclamation.
That was really impressive to my son.
Do you get the free rides on the Cyclone or on the Wonder Wheel thrown in there?
I've never rode on a Cyclone, no.
I was joking, but thanks so much for your time, and have a continued great retirement. And know on Tuesday evening that you'll have possibly yet another group of fans who are going to be able to watch Little Fugitive right there in Coney Island on Tuesday night. Should be remarkable.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Hopefully the weather holds up. Is that going to be outdoors or indoors?
No, it's outdoors. Yeah, keep your fingers crossed. And it was really nice to, quote-unquote, make your acquaintance. All right, I think I friended you on Facebook, so check out that next time you go online. And Mary, thank you very much. You'll be there Tuesday,
Sure,
of course.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, of course I'll be there. Yes, I'm happy to. Whatever they ask me to do, I'll be doing.
That's nice. I hope our paths cross again soon.
Yes, thank you so much. This was really great.
You're welcome. We'll have all the details up on the blog, but the details for this free screening are on the Rooftop Films website, of course, rooftopfilms.com, so you can check it out. Don't miss it. And I believe it might be the last event for the summer for Rooftop Films, since it's a rain date event. But I urge you to go down to Coney Island and soak it all in and get a little of the salty air while you're at it. Thanks again, guys, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, Adam, thank you very much.